Hey, Pretty Girl Club, I have a question. So, is this what dark skin looks like? Is this the representation of dark skin, unambiguous, monoracial black women with 4C hair? The reason I'm asking is because I notice that women with inferiority complexes say they want representation for their phenotype, but then they pretend to look like people like Meg the Stallion. And I'm probably going to do another episode maybe on like Olandria or Shelley, but you've got women pretending to look like Meg the Stallion. I'm sorry, since when is this color the representation of dark skin? So do you see how they move the goalposts? What they will do is they will find a woman who's really actually a deep caramel complexion, like a Meg the Stallion. They'll find a woman that was actually not even born dark skinned. Here are Meg the Stallion's baby photos. They'll take a woman who literally promotes her Creole heritage, literally has identified as red bone. They'll take someone who is maybe a deep caramel, maybe she tans to dark skin in the summer. Oh, and by the way, can we stop pretending that that's not a real thing? There are plenty of caramel people who get darker in the summertime. So I don't understand why women with inferiority complexes want to pretend that this doesn't exist. Also, let's say that she did bleach. Let's go with that narrative that she went from dark skin, unambiguous, to now being one shade off from an Asian person. This tells me that a lot of her audience doesn't actually care about colorism then, because you're openly supporting people who you feel have obviously bleached themselves to become light skinned. You're still supporting them. You're still standing that person. You still want to look like her. So if you want to look like her and she's a bleacher, then that means you wish you looked like a bleacher. So do you see how no matter which way you spin it, you can still see the hypocrisy? And for the unambiguous women saying, oh, well, it's just lighting and photo editing. Okay, well, they're still supporting a woman who is using lighting and photo editing to not look like them. So they're still clout chasing behind and standing a woman who does not want to be associated with their phenotype and does not want to represent their image. Notice how you got women trying to pretend like Meg the Stallion is like the deepest, darkest, most chocolatey person in the world. The only person who actually admitted that Meg the Stallion does not identify as an unambiguous dark-skinned woman was actually Chrissy. Meg the Stallion was actually a part of what inspired this YouTube channel, because I remember back in the day when content creators like Chrissy were saying that women like Meg the Stallion are not their representation because they don't actually look like Meg the Stallion. Just because somebody tans to a dark complexion for a couple of months out of the year, that doesn't mean that they have the same experience as someone who was born dark-skinned, grew up dark-skinned, their parents are dark-skinned, they're unambiguously black. No, they're not Creole. No, they don't have long, curly hair. No, they have kinky hair, broad features. Meg the Stallion's life experience and upbringing is not going to be the same. And I also saw people talking about Meg the Stallion's skin tone, and they're like, oh, well, Meg the Stallion is an unambiguous dark-skinned woman because she got shot. And I'm like, are you an idiot? So someone getting shot means they're dark-skinned. Do you hear the internalized colorism coming out right there? Oh, well, she got shot and she got bullied on the internet, so she must be dark-skinned. Also, I've noticed a pattern where they're conflating misogynoir with colorism. That's not the same thing. I've never seen anybody make comments and say, oh, well, Meg the Stallion is too dark for XYZ, or like I've never seen that. So I'm not saying that that kind of stuff doesn't exist, because you can still experience colorism if you're like not white passing, but people are conflating social media bullying with colorism. And have you ever noticed that whenever someone is a lighter skin tone, we voted on what's considered light skin on this channel. We took a vote, so there were thousands of us that actually voted on a poll. I think you guys chose Fenty 390 and above. So why are people trying to pretend like you can't be born a Fenty 390 and then you tan into becoming dark skin? Why are people pretending like that doesn't exist? It's because they want to clout chase off of Meg the Stallion's phenotype. They want to clout chase off Meg the Stallion's proximity to light skin. Because have you ever noticed that, first of all, they try to use a vague term called brown skin when in reality all of us are brown, okay? So if you are not white, if you're not white passing, if you're Hispanic, if you're Indian, if you're black, half black, biracial, whatever, you're brown. So they try to say, oh, well, this person, they're not light, they're just brown. Okay, if you benefit from colorism, you are light skinned. Okay, so light brown is somebody who benefits from colorism in any way. I don't care if you only benefit from it sometimes or like in the winter time. When you're an actual unambiguous dark-skinned black woman, benefiting from colorism is not an option. So it's hilarious how they'll try to pretend like they take the colorism conversation so seriously, but then they want to use women who benefit from colorism to be the representation of dark skin. It's actually laughable to claim that Meg Thee Stallion's skin tone is the darkest skin tone. That's laughable. That's laughable to claim that she is a representation for 4C hair. And I see some women saying, oh, well, it's just the lighting. Sometimes in the lighting, she looks very like beige or very like, like a very light golden caramel type of color. Okay, well, I've never seen Lupita. I've never seen her take photos and then she suddenly turns beige or she suddenly turns paper bag color. I've never seen that. And then let's talk about the bleaching conversation, because I also see some people saying that she's a bleacher. By the way, the most recent one who's being accused of bleaching is Tyla. So I am convinced at this point that anybody who benefits from colorism in any way, I don't care if you're light brown, I don't care if you're caramel, if you tan darker, and then in some of your pictures, maybe you go back light or it's wintertime or whatever, or the lighting's different, you're going to be accused of bleaching. I have never seen them accuse Lupita Nyong'o of bleaching, even though Lupita looks slightly lighter in some photos. No, but anytime you already kind of benefited from colorism in one way or another, I notice there is a pattern where they're still going to accuse you of some form of bleaching. Something else I notice about women who are kind of like Meg Thee Stallion's complexion, somewhere in that range where maybe you were already born a deep caramel shade and then you tan into being like a dark skin type of color. So these women, they have what I call skin tone fluidity. So you can go in between light skin or dark skin depending on your own, however much you want to stay in the sun. I see some women like this who stay in the sun a lot, kind of like Chili from TLC. She's a good example of somebody who's always in the sun in her photos. She does a lot of vacationing and stuff. She doesn't hide from the sun at all. And then you have some women where maybe they have the ability to tan to being dark skinned, but they don't want to. And so they kind of stay out of the sun. But one thing I wanted to talk about with Meg Thee Stallion's particular complexion is Meg Thee Stallion's skin tone kind of reminds me of somebody like August Alsina or somebody like Will Smith or somebody like The Game or like Trey Songz. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because all of those men have been called light skin. I've seen all of those men being called light skin on the internet. And I know that skin tone is subjective. That's another thing. I'm not the end all be all. I don't decide who's light skinned and who's not. Society decides who benefits from colorism and who doesn't. And so the bottom line is, if Meg Thee Stallion were actually a real dark-skinned woman, don't try to pretend like dark-skinned women don't exist. If she were actually Lupita's color, or if she were actually Doechie's color, whose color do you think Meg Thee Stallion is closer to? For those of you who believe in like the whole brown skin category, my thing with brown skin is, okay, you're either light brown or dark brown. You're either the type of brown skin that benefits from colorism or you don't. I don't care what skin tone nicknames people call themselves, but let's just put her pictures up next to a couple of like other celebrities of different skin tones. Which one, like which side of the spectrum does her particular shade of brown fall closer to? Does she fall closer towards light brown or closer towards dark brown? I'm just asking. I mean, there is no wrong answer, but I'm just saying, do you think that she would be where she is in the music industry if she were a legit dark-skinned woman? And why is it that you have legit dark-skinned women trying to ride the coattails or hide behind the phenotype of Meg Thee Stallion? What about Doechii? What about all these other women where they complain and say, oh, well, we don't have our representation. But instead, you go for a silky-haired, bust down, lace front poppin' or whatever, looser hair texture. She does not have 4C hair. Woman who barely reaches the dark skin category at her darkest, who has a Creole mother as the representation for unambiguous women. That's how I know it's a joke. That's how I know that the representation conversation is a joke. And a lot of women with inferiority complexes hate seeing their real phenotype being represented in the media. If Meg Thee Stallion would have had Lupita Nyong'o's hair texture and Lupita Nyong'o's skin tone, I just don't think she would be perceived the same way by Black women who are her core audience. I don't think she'd be perceived the same way. And also, a part of why you had some women on Chrissy's channel rejecting Meg Thee Stallion was because Meg Thee Stallion openly calls herself a redbone, or she did at the beginning of her career, and she openly talked about her Creole heritage several times. She's dating a biracial guy right now, I think. He's either biracial, multiracial. He's some sort of mixed race guy. I think he's a basketball player or something. And then if you go on websites where you've got a lot of women with inferiority complexes, like Lipstick Alley, that's a great case study. By the way, be sure to check out the Exotical page on Lipstick Alley. It's actually very interesting. But you'll see that people are saying, oh, Meg Thee Stallion wants to be light-skinned so bad. And then they're quoting Meg Thee Stallion's rap lyrics where she's like, oh, I'm a bad red bone from the South, blah, blah, blah. And they're essentially calling her a wannabe. I've only ever seen unambiguous women call women wannabes if that woman actually does have proximity to being light-skinned. Or, you know how they say to mixed women, oh, you want to be white. They only say that to mixed women who actually are part white or they look part white. So they're only calling you a wannabe because you are slightly succeeding at fitting into that community. You have a fluid identity of some sort. So you can't deny that Meg Thee Stallion, whether she's tanned, not tanned, whether it's the lighting. Like I said, I've never seen an actual dark-skinned person turn beige in their photos, but okay, whatever makes you sleep better at night. So you got women pretending that you can't go from a deep caramel to dark skin. They're pretending that deep caramel women can't tan to dark skin. And then at the same time, they're also pretending that all unambiguous women look like Meg Thee Stallion or like Olandria or Shelley, which is also a joke. And for the people who kind of have a similar mindset to me, where it's like skin tone is going to be subjective. And another thing I forgot to say too, usually the light skin police are actually people who uphold the paper bag test. That's the thing I've noticed as well. It's like, okay, if you're not white passing or if you're not lighter than a paper bag, which would be more like Ice Spice's color, they'll make that argument that, oh, you're not light skinned. And it's like, okay, you uphold the paper bag test then. So I don't want to hear anything about you calling the exotical space colorist when you're trying to enforce an entire identity based on the paper bag. And for the people who say, oh, well, depending on your geographical location, you could be called light. Kind of like, what's that girl, light-skinned Keisha? Remember that girl? Where they were like, oh, it should be called brown-skinned Keisha or dark-skinned Keisha. And then when she explained her background, she was saying where she was from, she was the lightest of the three Keishas. And like, you know, in her neighborhood, which was mainly unambiguous black people, she was the lightest one. So the term light-skinned, all that means is that you are relatively light compared to those in your group. So in Meg Thee Stallion's case, I don't think Meg Thee Stallion identifies as mixed, so I'm just going to identify her as monoracial with some Creole admixture. So let's say that Meg Thee Stallion is like 85% African. Is the average person that's 85% African, was the average person like that born with a beige skin tone and has a beige-toned mother? Is that average? Or is that somebody who would be considered relatively light compared to others of the similar DNA? And then when it comes to policing people's skin tones, it's like, okay, if she is from Texas and she was called redbone or red because she has a reddish undertone and she's not dark skinned, if that's what she's called, guess what? You can't argue with people's experiences. You can't argue with people's backgrounds. So now that we're on the subject, how many unambiguous dark-skinned women get called red or redbone? 0. You don't get called that as a nickname unless you are considered lighter than average in comparison to the other people from your background. Does it mean that you can't tan to dark skin? No. There are lighter people who tan into being dark all the time. So I'm not saying that that doesn't exist, but there are also some people who choose to stay within the caramel range. They don't want to tan darker. They like being in the caramel range. Maybe they feel like they receive a certain amount of privilege, or it's like it goes with their image or whatever they're trying to do with their social climbing goals or whatever. So for all the unambiguous women who view Meg Thee Stallion as your representation, even if she is bleaching, let's say that she's a bleacher, okay? Let's go with that narrative. How does it feel to know that your representation doesn't even want to look like you? So why would you even support somebody who doesn't even want to look like you? Like if somebody didn't want to look like me, I'm not going to try to hide behind them as my representation. No, I would want to be represented by someone who actually identifies with me and wants to look like me, not somebody who doesn't want to look like me. And let's talk again about photo editing, because I've noticed whenever a person's photos are lighter than normal, then people say she bleached, or they say that she edited the photo to make it lighter. And it's like, okay, that's how I know that that's a dark-skinned person saying that. Because anybody who's light-skinned knows that you can edit your photos to also look darker. Anybody who's light-skinned has experience doing that. You've either tanned before, or maybe you put like the sepia filter that makes you look slightly darker, slightly more golden. You can put like the burgundy filters. You can put the black filters on there. They have different photography styles where they literally do your photos underneath a shadow. And it creates like this dark gray ominous shadow. It kind of sets the mood of the photo, which will technically make you look darker. So why is it that when it comes to somebody like Meg Thee Stallion, all of her photos that are light, oh no, that's not her skin, it's just completely fake. But then her photos that are darker, oh well no, that's how she actually is. That's a coping mechanism because even if you look at music videos are more difficult to edit. It's more difficult to edit skin complexion and stuff like that in a video. So even if you were to look at her music videos, her Instagram videos and stuff, not the videos that are in the highest lighting, you can look at her in natural lighting. Just look at her just outside. Outside in the sun, outside in overcast weather. Why is it that even in those photos, her skin is still not giving ebony dark chocolate? So it's like, what's your excuse now? Just admit that you wish you looked like Meg Thee Stallion, but don't. And also for the skin tone police, Megan Good is a similar, like I view Megan Good and Meg Thee Stallion as being in a similar range. I'm not saying they're both the exact same skin tone, but like Megan Good actually comes to mind as well when I think of this skin tone range, where it's like maybe you're naturally a caramel. You're more so caramel at your lightest as opposed to being caramel at your darkest. So even with Megan Good, you see Megan Good going from this caramel shade into a deeper shade. And then you had people accusing her of being a bleacher as well. So it's like, okay, so then I guess everybody's a bleacher then. Okay, so now what? Why are you continuing to support Hollywood, which is filled with racist, colorist, texturist, featurist people, and then everybody's a bleacher as well? Why are you even listening to the music of bleachers? What do you ladies think? Let me know in the comment section, and I'll talk to you next time. Stay pretty, ladies.